Okay, I think we will get started. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar broadcast, wherever you are, whatever time it is. We really appreciate you being with us today. As you can tell, the conference discussion is why business continuity plans fail. I think that's a statement we can all agree with at one time or another. So this will be a webinar discussion. We hope you'll be taking away some useful insights and guidance and ideas that you can bring back to your own organization. I want to welcome our special guest speakers today. We have Carol Delate. She is the Senior Business Continuity Manager at Exeter Finance. She's been in the business resilience industry since 1997. So obviously had some firsthand experience with Y2K and was introduced to disaster recovery at that time, and later became a certified business continuity professional and also became an active member of the Association of Continuity Professionals. Also online in from Boston is Stephen Clancy. He's the Senior Director, Contingent Workforce Strategies, Knowledge and Research at SIA. He's primarily responsible for developing and supporting best practice advisory and market research for staffing industry analysts, Contingent Workforce Strategies, CWS. As a CW Strategies and Research Director, he works closely with buyers who are engaging MSP, VMS, RPO, and ATS solutions and services to support their organizations. And finally, Mark Connard. He's the Senior Director of Revenue and Management at R+L Carriers. He has over 40 years of experience in the LTL industry and starting his career earlier at Conoco's management training program, then spending approximately 14 years with Yellow Freight, and then the next 14 years with USF, and currently with R+L Carriers since 2009. So I want to welcome our great speakers. We really appreciate your time today. Also, for those on the line, we would love to have your questions. It's pretty simple. You could type in your question and just hit the horizontal orange button there. Somehow that reminds me of the NCAA March Madness. Don't tell me why, but maybe because my brackets, the arrow's pointing down. It's just my bracket's not doing too well. But anyway, appreciate you all being here. If you have any questions, we're going to work those into the dialogue in a little bit. I thought, you know, we've all been through quite an interesting 12 months, to say the least. So I thought it'd be a good place to start talking about business continuity. Is just maybe Mark, maybe help us kick off here. And in a nutshell, what do you think from a BCP perspective at a very high level? You know, you've obviously been around a little bit. What do you think the last year has taught you?
What I gained out of this is that I think we use our experience and we plan contingencies based on what we've become familiar with, what we know. What I've learned is there has to be much greater imagination in the future. I mean, who could have conceived that a virus would have brought down the world economy the way it did? So from my perspective, our imaginations need to be stretched. All contingencies exist out there: viruses, nation state politics, not just the weather, hurricanes, fires, plants going down, internet going out. It's a whole different thinking, but in my mind.
Got it. Okay, that's a great point. And Carol, do you believe that delivering on the requirements of BCP is more of a priority now? Do you hear your colleagues and senior executives thinking in a different way relative to BCP?
Oh, absolutely, Kirk. It has really opened the eyes of a lot of people that business continuity is a must for businesses. And if they had not heard of business continuity before, they certainly did in the past year because of the effects it's had on them. Before this past year, I'd say I worked in business continuity. You say, well, what's that? Now I can just say, well, you know, this pandemic, this is what causes business continuity. We still have to continue the business. And what do you do to prepare for that? So do I think that that means that we have a higher visibility for sure? The priority is being funded a lot more by most companies that I've been in touch with over the past year. It's really gotten a lot more people. We have a lot of job openings and looking for people to help out because it's going to be something that's going to be a higher priority going forward. Unfortunate that I have to be reactive that way, but sometimes that's what happens with budgets. You know, it's not until you, oh, yeah, I guess we need that now. So there it goes. Thank you.
Okay, great point, great point. And over to you, Stephen. I know one of the things we'll get into a bit more deeply today is the contingent workforce, but just to kind of give some ideas, to sprinkle some ideas in the minds of our visitors today, why is it so important we spend time and energy on the contingent workforce?
Well, I think past BCP plans have focused on, and we had this brought up in our preliminary discussions, focus on an asset, focus on a building. What we have to begin to incorporate is the actual talent structure that we have. You're starting to see organizations that 50% of their total workforce are contingent workers, which is amazing to many people when they first hear that statement. So the question is, do you know of those active contingent workers where they are? The other thing is the restructuring of the workplace itself now. What percentage is remote? Where are they located? And then how do you then execute a BCP plan that's not just focused on that particular building? Incidentally, there will be TENS planning still important to create for that, but now you have a different distributed and contingent workforce that you have to take into account, and just basic communication with that talent so you can execute your plan. If you don't know where they are, then how do you, and how to reach them, then how do you execute your plan? That's just basic fundamentals now.
So just as a follow-up to that, the fundamental structure of the way organizations are built seems to be in a huge sea change, one that, again, we didn't necessarily know was coming. Even in the last week, you had the New York Times declaring that New York City will never be the same, that we will never see the same numbers of people working in those offices. And the Wall Street Journal contradicted that a few days later. But I guess what I'm getting at is it seems like companies are in such a state of flux, even with their own people, and then couple that with the contingent workforce. It seems to me there's a lot going on in the minds of these senior leaders in these companies with the workforce and management. Is it potentially an overlooked issue, this contingent workforce, given all these other priorities?
Well, I think so, because our experience was, as Stephen was mentioning, we do quite a bit of business outsourcing with valued collaborative partners, and we had connections, we had facilities, but then suddenly, to Stephen's point, we had to communicate with the management teams of those BPO asset management groups to get in touch with their teams. Where are you going to work from? Can you work from where you're at? Because all of a sudden, much of our work was done in India, and as a nation state, they shut down travel, and you had to harbor at home. So our partners had to reach their people and say, how do we get them up and get connected to support the contractual obligations they had to our company? And just the same, we had to do the same work at R&L carriers within the state. So our people couldn't come to work, and we had to start distancing people from one another just to maintain the continuity of our business, so we didn't have a rampant exposure to the virus and lose multiple assets all at once. So I think Stephen's right on with comments he was making, the points he was setting forth. So that was our concern, challenges.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go into one more of our scripted, some of these scripted questions. So for folks today, do you incorporate performance sustainability elements in your BCP in terms of scalability, up or down? That's just open to anybody who wants to jump in.
My sense is that you're going to have probably more waves that you're going to experience in the general economy, and you're going to have some ups and downs that potentially, from a performance standpoint, even though BCP is on, maybe everybody focuses on disasters, and I don't know, Carol, in your experience, whether you begin to bring that into the scalability. I mean, I'm thinking about sustainability. You hit a level of performance, you have a certain sustainability that you want to make sure that you can keep that performance no matter what's happening in the marketplace. And that means how well can you scale up? How well can you scale down? Incidentally, contingent work isn't the answer to everybody's business problems, okay? But that can bring some scalability around those performance challenges that are caused by big sustainability events. I don't know what you see in some of your BCP planning, Carol.
Well, as far as that goes, the sustainability, we've always had a percentage, like with disasters, you always plan on being degraded about 30% of what you were having before, so you should be able to operate at 70% of what you had. And in this case, with the pandemic, it really came down to more like 50 or 40% instead of 70%. So it was quite a much bigger hit this time in most cases that I saw and heard about. So it was it hit a lot harder than anyone anticipated. So that did cause a lot of concern around.
Okay.
Our practical experience at R&L was, that in terms of the sustainability of it, suddenly we had a mass cataclysmic change. Usually our scalability, we're always thinking about growth and working with our contingent partners to ensure that they scale up as we anticipate growth and need. Never have we been in a situation where suddenly within a 72-hour period, we lost 90% of our capacity. And I wish I had the answer, because if I had the answer, I wouldn't be on this. I'd be with my own startup telling everybody how to do this. But I am still baffled, and it boggles my mind. We spend a lot of time talking about if we encounter this situation again where you lose that much capacity, how do you sustain your performance? We were able to do some things with internal assets, deviate and take them off of other duties to perform the things we needed to do our operations and revenue planning to sustain our business. But I still don't have the answer, and maybe one of our listeners may have the answer and can share with us how to do it. So
yeah, well, folks who you don't necessarily have to pose a question, you could make a comment as well per Mark's point there. But Mark, one thing about what you just said, I find when you really ponder it, is part of the clue or part of the puzzle relate in some way to the internet strength in a given geography, as well as the readiness of an individual to work from home. When you talk about 90% going out, I don't know if every part of the world reacts to that level, if you see what I'm saying.
Well, no, it's a perfect point, because this is what we experience practically, is that, we had planning and continuity plans to ensure, duplication and backup of internet connectivity, that we had different plants and facilities to seat people. The real issue became when you couldn't go to those physical work environments to do work, and then everyone had to work distributed. Just like in the United States, many of the foreign countries, there's different levels of access to high quality internet connectivity. And so that's what they experienced a lot in India. A lot of their people could work in businesses and centers that they had good connectivity, but once they moved to work from home, you didn't have cable connections. You had to rely on cellular hotspot connections, and some of that was spotty. We even see some of that here in these states where some people are in metro areas and some people work rurally that just don't have the same level of services. And so that's a key point that we started to think about and came up with ideas on how we can support those assets of ours who don't have great internet service, which if you have it, it's, it's like plumbing. You turn the water on, you expect the water to work, but some places you don't have any water pressure. Some places you don't have good internet, but we're so dependent on that now. I mean,
and to add to that, whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of the worker to, be able to find a Starbucks or somewhere where they can plug in with decent connectivity? Or is the responsibility of the business owner to provide the connectivity necessary for them to do their work?
I'll offer a comment. I don't own the company. We're privately held, but they didn't grow this company to the size and profitability it did by saying, well, you guys are on your own. I believe at this particular enterprise, we see it as our responsibility to ensure that our assets contribute to their maximum capacity. And that it's not your job to go find a Starbucks. I guarantee if you don't got good internet access, you're probably not living very close to a Starbucks anyway, or a McDonald's, or wherever you go.
That's true. That's true. Well, let's go on. Yeah, excuse me. Let's go on to the next question, and that would be, this is really the moment to share, and because everyone was in this boat in some way or another. But what was missing from your BCP plan that should have been included, and what impact this had on the pandemic response phase? Who would like to take that one first? Carol.
I'll take that one first. So in my experience, pandemic has always been a separate document that was created by the crisis management team and was outside of the BCP plan altogether. And so that right in itself is an issue, because no one hardly ever took the time to exercise or test the pandemic response phase. No one ever did that. Because no one thought that it would take the people out of the workplace. They thought people would die, that they would have a lot of people dying off, but they never thought that, they're all going to live, or most of them will live. They just need someplace else to work. So there was a whole mindset, a paradigm shift of what that pandemic, the effects of that would be, because there's not a single pandemic plan that I've ever seen that actually took it from the point where it happened this time, where it was always an epidemic that everyone was dying, and the effects it would have on an office place that you would need contingent workers. You need somebody to do the work instead of the people that aren't there. But it was never the point of, oh my gosh, these people all can't come to the workplace. They've got to go work somewhere else, and they have to all be socially distanced and all these other parameters. But I think another thing that was missing from the BC plan that I wasn't Exeter Finance. I was with a different company, so we can't slam Exeter. I wouldn't do that. But with the company I was with at the time, they really had a very small section on supply chain and third parties. And I think that really needed to be much more in the forefront, because the company I was with at the time, they are a manufacturing firm. We still had the workers to do the work, but we couldn't get the supplies. So we still couldn't do the work. And so there's frustration from there. But no one thought that was going to be, that it was going to be this far reaching globally, a true global pandemic. So that, but that's something that is hardly ever, we always, do the hurricane or the tornado, or a virus gets through the computer, not through the people, but gets through the equipment. Things like that. The other types of losses, but not a loss such as this, that it's a people loss, but it's really a workplace loss. And so it shifted right midstream, pretty much right from the beginning. And that was definitely not really seen in DC plans that I've seen over the years. And that really caused an upset. However, people because they had exercised their business continuity plan, at least knew to jump from there. They knew how to take a quantum leap and be able to figure it out. Those that just left the plans on the shelf or didn't ever take them out, except that one time a year for the tabletop test, they're the ones who really suffered because they really didn't take the concept seriously.
Interesting. Good points. What do you guys, Stephen, what do you think?
I only can add a little bit to really the excellent response that Carol has given there, and really framing maybe what wasn't in the response for a pandemic and losing the workplace. Just an example, we know that there was a number of folks a year ago this month, they were sending people home with desktops because you think about all the different components. And the other thing that I don't, and I think there's a lot of risk that was taken, is there was no real data security plan. Now all of a sudden the data is flowing from a remote spot. And are they using a VPN? Because you're in-house with the internet, now you're dealing potentially, if you're going to VPN, yeah, you're in the internet, but if not, then now all of a sudden you're really exposed with data security. And so is that part of the plan? Because this is a new operating environment that you're working on. I'm sure that they scrambled and got some procedures in there, but that wasn't potentially in the BCP plan before, because as Carol said, nobody really, and I think this is an important point, nobody really said, okay, let's shut down a building and see what happens.
Right.
Test it. We have this technology in Contingent Workforce business called the Vendor Management System, the VMS, and everybody pretty much has one in the bigger firms, that piece of software. And so when we talk about sustainability of the Contingent Workforce program that manages all this activity with contingent work, we say, well, how good is your BCP plan? Well, I'm not sure. I said, why don't you turn off the VMS and see what happens? Okay, so anyways, testing, and also I would add data security.
I agree.
What about you, Mark?
Well, to that point, I would just add, guys and gals that run our IMT technology group, had the vision. We're a VPN outside connectivity, so we had that covered. However, we hadn't done a good job of saying, does everybody have the equipment? Because so many of these applications that run our processes are proprietary, and we haven't loaded it on someone's personal computer. So we were doing exactly what Stephen said. I remember taking my suit off, putting jeans on, because we were unhooking PCs, monitors, keyboards, mice, and putting them on carts and putting them in the back of trunks for people to take home, and giving them printed instructions on how to access the VPN to restart at the house, because we were having to start with the office. So we did not have that in our contingency plan. So we certainly think about it now. We did have the foresight to start buying a lot of these mini tower, I don't know what they are, let the IT guy figure it out. But, we stocked up, stockpiled that stuff, and we're ready. We can work from anywhere now. So lesson learned.
Do you all think the companies that were from their very foundation, they were distributed, they pushed for remote, they built their companies with the concept of we can manage people from wherever they are. IBM comes to mind to a degree, but there's lots of other companies in the new economy who really leaned heavily on the idea that we can be more agile if we're more remote. Is it logical to think that those companies are going to be better prepared for the kind of things we went through, and obviously maybe some of the nuts and bolts of keeping the business running, but is it too much of an assumption to think that their BCP would have been stronger or more resilient in a situation like we went through?
I think by default, with this particular event and pandemic, they were able to leverage, take a company like TopTal, okay? It's an online talent platform. They're completely remote. They're like what REI did. They had that beautiful headquarters in Oregon, and I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, they sold it off and they went completely virtual, completely remote, except for their retail outlets. And who knows if most of that ends up going remote because people are buying stuff online. It's a transition of the core workplace fundamentals. And so when you start ticking off the issues, TopTal, I don't think they have email. They use Slack. I mean, you use MS Teams. That's document storage, security, and also collaboration because you're all someplace else. You're not physically together. And it can add to the security, but it can add to be able to execute remotely. So if you just change your communication strategy, your interact strategy, but that they were ready for it. And I'll just say one last thing in that I've been working out of remotely for a couple of different businesses for the last 20 plus years. This didn't affect me as far as what I was doing on a daily basis. I had to mask up and do other kinds of things but I just kept operating.
What do you think, Carol? Do you think the advantage went to companies that were already adept at managing remote teams and working with remote partners?
Yes, I do think they had an advantage up front, but I think that most of the rest of us came up to speed rather quickly. Especially if you had at least some capability prior, like Stephen was saying, he worked remote for a long time. I worked remote at least, 1 or 2 days a week. So I was already kind of used to either in the office or at home. But there's a lot of workers that weren't that way, that, just couldn't do that. But a lot of call centers had already gone distributed. You didn't know if you were calling State Farm at 3 in the morning and talking to someone in their pajamas or not. You just didn't know because it didn't really matter what time zone you were in, if that makes sense. So there's a lot that had already done those kinds of things where it made sense, but there's others where it just really depends on the industry. Quite frankly, if you have a company that you need the people there to do what needs to be done, assemblies and things like that that are not 100% automated. Or need inspections at certain times, and you can't necessarily inspect unless you actually look at it and touch it and move it and see if it works.
Did you have any points on that one, Mark?
Well, yeah, we're in a trucking business, so we're in the dirty world business. We're not new technology. It started with a wagon. Now we got tractors and trailers, but there may have been some first mover advantages, some people like IBM, these tech services and consulting, but we quickly learned. And as we learned that became a new opportunity for us to reduce costs, but more so, I think we've learned that people working from home value that experience, and we're starting to see that applying more effort to ensure that they can stay at home. And we've seen activity go up. We've seen turnover go down in certain aspects of our business. Just think of, caretakers at homes who have to look at children or have a plumber come in. They used to have to take a half a day of vacation to go take care of those things. They don't do that anymore. And they stay connected, they stay working, they've been trained, they're very effective and efficient. So what advantages some others had, obviously they had them. I think we have quickly caught up with that, and we are realizing the benefits and advantages of that. And that's another lesson from this. Had this not occurred, we may not have thought in those terms. We were still thinking in our old world terms. So I'm sitting in a brand new office building that doubled the size of our space 3 years ago, and it was nearly 100% occupied. I got a whole floor. I could pick a conference room to come in, which I did. So I'm not sure how many people are coming back, but not many. There's not going to be a lot of people coming back, but we're better for it, probably.
Sure. Well, let's first of all, for everyone on the line, if you have any questions or comments, I want to encourage you to go ahead and file those with us and hit the orange arrow button. And then I want to move on to a bit more practical discussion. You know, we really want to help our listeners today on the construction and contents of their core BCP plan. So maybe we'll start with you, Carol. Is your BCP an all hazards approach, or does it have appendices for identified risks and vulnerabilities?
Not the one I'm currently working with at Exeter Finance, but I have been at a couple of companies where they did do an all hazards approach, but I don't necessarily recommend it as much, just because even weather is not the same approach. You don't exit the building if it's a tornado, but you do exit the building if it's a fire. So how could that be all hazards? You can't tell them, well, what do? You stay or you go. You have to kind of just know. So from that standpoint, and that's just a very simplistic example, but the point being is that you can have a core plan and then have appendices for all the different types of risks and threats and vulnerabilities that affect the company. So it's fine to have one, like I said, a core plan, and then have a lot of different appendices that you can just branch off of. This is where also, if you have a commercial off-the-shelf, a Cots kind of plan, that would actually lean in towards having a core plan that, you know, would put your components together based upon what your application or your department's needs are.
Okay. Other thoughts from Stephen or Mark?
We do so we're focused on the contingent workforce program that sits inside, you know, organizations, and they can be focused on North America or global in nature. And so what we do is, and it's probably the BCP is part of this sustainability approach we have, and there's different kinds of risk that we look at. Some of these are you know, legal risk, some of them are operational risk, some of them are strategic, which is brand, you know, this kind of thing. But the only thing, and I think Carol's hit the mark, if this can get so big, it's not focused, and so it's not usable, it's not effective, it's not practical. But what we've been telling our clients in our council is that here's your risk categories, complete a risk assessment so it can inform you of some specifics you want to make sure is covered in your BCP. And so that's probably how I can position what we talk about. It starts with sustainability. What are the things you need to have? And then drive that into some of the BCP operation plans to go execute when certain things happen.
Okay. Anything to add, Mark?
I mean, all hazards. What are all the hazards? I mean, who knows? I mean, a year ago, I didn't think virus was a hazard, but I mean, I go back to a comment I made earlier is, you know, I've learned you've got to think with more imagination, not just depend on looking at what I already know, but, you know, getting the crayons and the paper out and start drawing pictures and coming up with something creative. What is it that I don't know that I can imagine may happen? But then to Stephen's point, is we still got to be focused. You can get so off the edges on this thing. I don't know where it could lead. You have to stay focused on the business of the day, but, you know, good leaders are looking over the horizon to say what may happen. And I just think imagination, I need to stretch mine. I can talk about me. So that's one thing I have to do for my company is be a little bit more imaginative.
So this is an interesting, sorry, go ahead.
Kirk, I was just going to say, you know, Carol, have you seen where people have overinvested in BCP plans?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I have kind of a question along that same line for Mark. So in these situations of, and I think you're absolutely right, you have to be more imaginative. Don't be too narrow in your thinking. But I have seen situations sometimes in the technology industry in terms of spending that even like risk management, the famous line of don't do something that'll put you on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So the C-suite is always trying to figure out what do we got to make sure this is to make absolutely sure we're not the poster child for screwing up BCP. We want to use our imagination, but again, it kind of boils down to budget sometimes. And I'm just wondering, maybe it's not overinvestment, but are companies more vulnerable to fixating on BCP or trying to reduce all this risk when you're trying to balance what's possible and what's not possible, and trying to put metrics behind that?
That's a question to me.
Yeah, I mean, that was supposed to be a question.
So since we're in the, it's trying to find that balance point, because you know, some of the panelists gain money by us contracting with them to help us with these things, which I can appreciate. But then when you're a privately held company and you pretty much report the performance of the company up to a very small family, you've got some responsibility there to give good advice and counsel. So I think you can overspend. I mean, you got to balance what's in the budget to what's doable, assess it against the risk. But in fairness, you know, you need to be open to learning things that you simply have not been exposed to in the past, at least taking it in, putting the cards on the table, and then trying to make good decisions between the men and women that are leading the organization. I don't think there's any simple answer, but that's what, to get to a certain level of management, that's your job, is to think.
Yeah,
critical thinking
right.
skills, taking the facts
Right.
and being practical with them. So
Very true. Okay, well, why don't we move on to the next question? Is a BCP plan more prone to fail when not aligned with the clauses of ISO 22301? And, you know, this kind of moves in the direction of whether staying aligned with international standards or whether or not to adopt them. So any thoughts on that?
I have thoughts on that. A BCP document should align with the clauses of ISO 22301. Whether or not you implement the ISO 22301 and you pay for the standard and keep it updated, that's a different story, and that can be a budgetary thing. It also can depend upon the size of the company. But at the end of the day, what ISO 22301, which is the standard for business continuity, it came out in 2012. It actually takes the core of business continuity planning and expanded it into the 10 clauses that you usually see in an ISO standard. Usually, but it's structured very, very much the same every ISO standard out there is. And at the end of the day, the plan, do, check, act, which is the core of business continuity, is to have a cyclical, ongoing plan. You plan, you do, which is exercise, you check and make sure what worked, what didn't work, and you act upon it and make an improvement. And you do that over and over again, usually on an annual basis. The 22301 took that concept and made it into an international standard. So I do believe that every BC plan should follow that same thought process of the plan, do, check, act. Whether or not you apply it and buy the standard, that will make you, the reason you would buy the standard is it's a marketing differentiator, for one thing, that you have a company that, you know, that is aligned with an international standard. Some companies, that is never going to matter, but still the concept of ISO 22301 needs to be applied, because it goes right back to the core of plan, do, check, act.
Okay. All right. So in other words, it's important to keep it aligned. Mark or Stephen, any thoughts on that?
I'm thinking, I'd like to hear maybe from Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
now I need to become a student of exactly what it is. Since we're primarily a domestic business, we don't get too wholly involved in that type of certification.
Yeah. I think also, ISO standards are very critical. I mean, it takes a while for them to be developed. It developed from a very diverse group across the world, and so I think there's something to be learned from those. The thing that I wanted to just add is you should also have your own internal measurement that when you put in these BCP plans and policies, you should also look to see how it impacts your ability to sustain your competitive advantage in the marketplace. You don't want to get so restrictive, and probably is not the case maybe with the BCP plan, but beyond that, where people get so, they overreact. For what we went through, I don't blame people for overreacting. But then what you have to do is you're going to measure this against your competitive performance in the marketplace and make sure you don't start throwing in some restrictive policies that don't allow you to compete as well as you can. So you got to have, Mark said, you got to have a good balance approach. We talked about overinvestment, at least I mentioned it, and I'm just suggesting that we have to make sure that we don't go so far over that all of a sudden, we're restricting our ability to conduct the business that we need to, and in the way we need to. It's a tough balance. It's not a perfect answer. This ISO standard can give you some guidance, but then you have to, decide this is the kind of position we need to be able to plan for the future if something happens.
Okay, perfect. And we have another kind of more of a nuts and bolts question. So I think, Carol, you probably be the best one to take this one is, do you use the MS suite of tools to create BC documents, or do you use a Cots product? And, what are the pros and cons of using prepackaged software to manage BC programs, in your opinion?
Okay, so more companies than not use the MS suite of tools to create their BC documents. They use the basics, the Excel and Word and PowerPoint, and they put it all together, and it works perfectly fine, but it has a tendency to allow for people to go rogue. So if you're a company that is heavily audited or heavily regulated, I would highly recommend that they use a commercial off-the-shelf COTS, commercial on-the-shelf, off-the-shelf product, one that is already packaged to address that. So there are certain brands that are more suited towards the financial services. There are some that are more suited towards manufacturing services. There are some that are just generic out there. But I think it's really important, depending upon what you see down the road. If you're a private company and you can just throw it together and be done with it, but you could be a private company that doesn't really understand business continuity, and you want to have some structure to start with. And I think that's a great idea, is to buy into a product that already exists, and you just kind of put your data in, and then it creates the product for you. And that definitely makes it easier to maintain. So in the long run, I think it's better to have a product unless it doesn't fit your company.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And I'd like to go back to more of a higher level question for our panelists today is, what is the single greatest insight gained from managing BCP through the pandemic? I know we've kind of touched on this before, but if you were really forced to try to crystallize the biggest insight, what would it be?
I'll weigh in quickly. It's the value of our people. It's the value of assets. I mean, I think we focus too much on data connectivity, physical plant, disaster recovery in terms of the physical and not the people. And it became very, very apparent to us. Probably a wake-up call many people came to is that just how important each one of us is, and the people that we work with. That's the clarity that I gained in this thing.
Okay.
I'm going to steal Mark's idea because it's resonating in my mind, and that is bring a new imagination to how the business can operate moving forward, and not be trapped by, well, this is the way we do it. This is the infrastructure we have, because I think it'll allow you to have more effective BCP plans in place, but also might completely help you transform the way the business operates. Because guess what? In a lot of industries, the business has been able to operate not only more effectively, but in many cases, including ours, more profitably.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll give you an example. So we run this CCWP certification program, and we've been doing it virtually over Zoom. And we do amazing, we commit unnatural acts with Zoom. I mean, it's just wonderful what we're able to do as far as polls, activities, myth and realities, all kinds of things in an educational knowledge transfer product. But guess what? I'm not traveling. I'm not paying for food. I mean, there's just all these expenses because everything was done in person before. And now using Mark's counsel, I have to bring a new imagination of how I'm going to execute that program moving forward to make it more effective and increase the return on investment for us being involved in a certification in the industry.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add to that. I agree with everything you said, Stephen, but I think at times the personal effect is really good too. You know, when I don't want to be 100% removed 100% of the time from people I work with. It's nice once in a while to have that, you know, so much team building and expo you can do virtually, you know. So,
Yep.
just, you know what I'm saying? And there's a lot to be said for that. So you can only get so much through a Zoom. I know some companies right now are doing Zoom-free Fridays just to not have so much in your face.
Oh,
kind
that's
of thing.
right, yes. Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, so I think a hybrid is what's going to happen, because I understand a lot of companies are allowing the individual employees, for the most part, to be able to choose how many days a week they come in, or, you know, if they come in 100% or, you know, never at all, that kind of thing. But, which I think is great, because some people do much better working from remote. They do get more done. I'm one of those. I'm much more effective. It's just not being distracted by all my coworkers coming over to say hello, show me their grandchildren's pictures, you know, which I love, but at the end of the day, you know, it can be very distracting. So from that standpoint, it's nice once in a while, though.
That's a real important point. We actually have some in-person classes scheduled for the later half of the year. So we're going to have, there's going to have to be a balance, and depends on what kind of value you're bringing to the marketplace, what's the business you're in, and then, but I think it's going to have your word hybrid. It's going to have that mix, and you got to figure out what the right balance is for the business you're in.
Yeah.
Okay, we got two more questions to knock out. Again, if anybody out there has any other thoughts or comments, please don't hesitate and put them through. Again, for panelists, do you conduct an annual risk assessment that reviews strategic, operational, safeguarding resources, and compliance that can inform the details of your BCP focus?
So this is something that we bring to our folks. So we do program maturity assessments to, again, focused on the contingent workforce program. And what we're saying is, because there's all different kinds of risk in these particular areas when you're using a contingent worker. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to assess, will it actually happen? And if it does, what's the impact? Not all that is going to be, you know, placed in a BCP plan, but it can inform the details. And we have built this little Excel-based tool to help people do that as far as our council members are concerned. But we try to look at all these different kinds of things, and it's based on trying to sustain sustainability. But there's a lot of risk involved with using a contingent worker, and so we try to get people to look at all these different kinds of aspects. But then we said, with all that rich information, you know, can you put, you know, additional detail in your BCP? Not all of it, but where it makes sense.
Okay. Anything to add, Mark or Carol?
Well, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Carol. No,
I was just going to say, yes, we do conduct annual risk assessments, and don't often have to change a lot, because risks don't often change year to year. And you can do a casual just pass over of, oh yeah, these are all the same kind of thing. But you know, every couple of years it's better to dive a little deeper and expose some things like Stephen was talking about. Mark?
Yeah, so we do annual, but I think what we've learned is back to the theme, I think we're going to have to look a little deeper into the woods for the wolves that are lurking out there that our imagination heretofore didn't envision. So um, opportunity for learning, growth.
Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes it takes a little, sometimes it takes a little bit to get this thing established if you haven't been doing it on a formal basis. But to Carol's point, after you get it established, then, your business is not going to change so much that the risk assessment's going to change a lot. What we also try to do, Carol, is we try to do a 2x2 and basically put dots on where people fall in certain kinds of risk levels. And now there's our risk profile standing in front of us physically. And how do you want to manipulate that to move that? Because the other balance is don't move if everything is all done by the bottom, left quadrant, then I'm not too sure how you're operating as a business because you're so locked down. Who wants to do business with you?
Right.
And then there's a balance on the other end where, you're pretty risky in the way that you're operating. You're probably being sued left and right. So, so there's different, and that just can, deeply inform you and having a strategic conversation about that once you do all that detailed work. It can then allow you to almost BCP is your execution plans when stuff happens.
So I'd just like to close it out with just a comment from each of you. Where relative to this conversation, where do you think we will be in a year, like 2 to 3 years down the road? I think about the issue of data privacy and breaches and hackers. And I remember 10, 15 years ago, suddenly there was a much greater understanding of, wow, this is stuff we can't mess around with. We've got to be locked down. We've got to understand what phishing is. We have to understand how to protect corporate assets. And there was definitely a consciousness raising process. Is that where we'll be with BCP? Do you think there's going to be a much more active dialogue relative to strategy and things, or is that overplaying it, again, 2 to 3 years down the road?
I was just going to say, I think that BC is now going to be a well-known term in business and well-versed and at least looked into, whereas in the past it didn't have nearly as much visibility. So I'm glad to see it get better visibility for the length and strength of the company going forward. But that's basically how I feel about it. It's that it's a good thing and that it's here to stay. And yeah, you can overdo it, but I think once you figure out the hybrid of how things are going to be working with the people over the next year or two, I think that's going to really drive where you take the BC plans.
Thank you.
Yes, awesome.
Who's next?
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think we've gained a higher awareness of being more certain in how we assess our BCPs. And again, it's going to be, I hate to keep kicking the same dog around, but it's imagine what we were kind of rote about it. I don't think we can be rote about it anymore. We're going to have to really stretch our thinking, but then balance it to practical things. But I think this is a tide change that we have experienced in business, and it's an opportunity for some real growth if companies and enterprises choose to accept it as that, and maybe that becomes a competitive advantage that we gain over others. I don't know. You have to be seen, but it's out there now. It's the genie's out of the bottle. So
Got it.
Yeah, and I just leverage what Mark said, and that is, I think we're going to have to go visit that risk assessment planning, and because we're transforming what the workplace looks like. There's going to be a balance on remote and on premise. There's going to be a balance between the contingent workers that our people are operating with, or is it full time? And then we have to do is build the BCP around that new operating model. And I think that's where some work is going to need to be done. We might be thinking about, well, we got to be more prepared for a pandemic happening because it happened in our lives right in front of us every 100 years. No, these things are probably going to happen more frequently. But something else is transforming right underneath our feet, in front of our eyes, and that is the actual workplace is changing. And so how prepared are we for managing that? And from a disaster recovery or BCP planning perspective, we need to do some work and upgrade those for that new future mode in the next 3 to 5 years.
Excellent.
Agreed.
Well, you've all given us some great insights today. Honestly, very, very helpful. Carol, Mark, and Stephen, we very much appreciate it. Also, our friends at DATAMARK for putting on this program today. It's been a pleasure to be part of it. I'm sure we'll be in touch with us going forward. Again, have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.